All right, so basic cuts in Fiore are fairly simple. The first is the fendente, which is just simply a 30-degree angle descending blow. Nice and simple, works well. Next cut in Fiore in Donna Sinistra or left tog if you're a KDF practitioner is the Reverso Fendente, same concept. 30-degree angle flows from left to right. Next cut in Fiore is the Mazzani. Starting in Donna here, you throw a horizontal hue to the head with the palm of the lead hand up at the sky. You can then step in with a thrust. Next cut in Fiore is from, again, Donna Sinistra. It's a falso to the head. The big thing with this is your thumb is pointed, so the tip palm of the thumb is down, and you hit with a false edge and then can circle around with other blows. The last two cuts of Fiore are the Satani from Coda Lunga. I like to teach it because it's easy. So sword behind you, step off line, whip up with the false edge. Then the final hue in Fiore is the Reverso Satani. Let the sword drop behind you, step off line, come up with a false edge. All right, so guard and stance in Fiore. It's actually fairly simple. What I teach is make your feet take the shape of the letter L, step a shoulder width and a half apart, and bend your legs and put the weight on the balls of your feet. For a lot of these guards, left foot forward, Fiore does fight on his non-dominant side, so we're going to be using both sides. That said, the first guard I ever teach is Posta di Donna, or the guard of the woman. A lot of people hold it like this. I think that is the artwork being rotated so you can see the hand position. So instead what I do is I say you keep your torso relatively forward. You have your flat on your shoulder, hand on the backhand on the pommel, lead hand by the cross, and then you can throw pretty much any Fiore cut from this guard, which is what Fiore says. The next guard is Coda Lunga. This guard is again quite simple. Pommel by about your groin, sword trailing behind you, nice sane stance. You can again throw almost any cut but the two left-sided rising and horizontal blows. So you can throw your left fendente, you can throw your right fendente, you can throw your right Mazzani, and you can throw your right Satani. So our next guard is Tutta Porta de Ferro. So you take Coda Lunga, and instead of having your sword running perpendicular to your lead foot, you have it run horizontal to your lead foot. This guard is useful for the play of the exchange of the thrusts, where you just place and then stab in. Following this, you switch to left foot forward. Oh, there's also window guard. A lot of people hold it like that, which is horrendously inefficient in a fight. You're going to eat a leg shot. Don't do that. What I'd recommend is you hold it point forward, cross about equal to your nose, front foot point at the target, maintain that good fencing stance. You can still throw strong cuts. You can chamber cut this way. You have options. It's also not a pose you stay in. It is a transitory guard. Fiore has a couple of these. We'll go over the other ones in a moment. This one is beautiful, like if you throw a left Reverso Fendente that we just went over, you can then cover in window and parry riposte. Our next guard is Porta de Ferro Manzana, or the middle iron gate. If you've done KDF, it's Albar. So left foot forward, big toe always points at your target, sword down in front of you. This is for thrusting or setting up hanging parries. Our next guard is similar but a little different. It's Diente de Cinghiale, or the boar's tooth. So with boar's tooth, you want your pommel about even with your groin, your blade away from the target at a 45-degree angle. This is used for the boar's tooth whip as well as thrusting. So you can thrust with a lunge, or you can use the falsos to parry an oncoming blow and either cut straight down or cut around. It's a very simple guard. Fiore says it's actually the best guard for long-term fencing if you want to end the fight quickly. Our next guard is Posta di Donna Sinistra. So Donna is here, Donna Sinistra is here, flat on the shoulder yet again, left foot pointed at the target. This allows you to throw almost any cut. Right? The only thing you can't do is a right-sided Satani, but you have all of the other options. You can also use this, once again, to set up a non-dominant side exchange of the thrusts from a high guard, which is effectively a non-dominant Zornhau-Ort. It's a really fun trick against people. For our next guard, we're going to move to another fluid guard like Fenestra or Window was. So Fenestra is here. Our next fluid guard is Frontale or Corona, depending on who you ask. So once again, I believe left foot forward. This is off memory, so it could be right. Fiore nerds, don't shoot me. You want to put your pommel braced on your forearm, cross level with your mouth, point slightly high. This is a bind work guard. If I come to a bind with someone in standard long point or longa in Fiore, I then switch to frontale, and I can flick my point in to land first scholar and first master. We'll do a more detailed summary of this in a second. Our next guard, and this is most of them already, is Donna Soprana, which is back-weighted Donna. So Meyer has Zornhut, Fiore has Donna Soprana. The whole concept behind this is you are changing the measure of the fight by back-weighting. So if you're in Donna's regular Donna, you back-weight and then step back and cut to change the measure at which the fight occurs. This is one of the least useful guards in Fiore, but it still has applications. So that's the guards of Fiore. Next, we actually get into the blade work in place. All right, take two. Fiore's first master, first scholar, and second master. So now then, once you've come to a bind, that's where the actual plays of Fiore began. He shows three different binds. They are long range, mid range, and short range. At the long range, or largo, we are bound effectively at the tips. If you are bound here, you got to play differently than if you're bound here. So we come to a bind. Now then, my point is currently online. The artwork in Fiore actually shows the points being a little high. So I bring my point high. There's a lot of ways to achieve this bind. We can go over that later. For now, start with that point slightly offline and slightly high bind. So first master is very simple. It is a thrust to the throat. To achieve this, I have to get my point online somehow. So what I do is I flick my hands down and then take a passing step into Chuck's throat. So a little quicker, it's bind, frontale, throat. Nice and simple. You're effectively using momentum to win the bind. From here, there is first scholar. So this time I flick in and get displaced. So I continue my step and come to the forearm, or I flick, I pass, I hang. See how my hands come high? That's very important. If I don't do this, I can't shed Chuck's blade. And I step and come to the head. From this side, it's actually a fairly simple technique. So you're here, you pull to here, you flick down, you pass. If you get deflected, you hang, you cut to the arm, and then withdraw in a guarded position. So the other thing to pay attention to with this is if you're experienced, use a sense of Fühlen like you would in German fencing. If you're inexperienced, what I tell my noobs to do is watch their point. So if I'm here in the bind and I flick in and my point stays on line, I stab Chuck in the face. Nice and simple. On the other hand, if I'm here, my point goes offline, I will immediately know to hang and cut around. So next things next in this particular sequence is second master. Once again, we have come to this bind, but now instead of at the tips, we are at the middle of the sword. This, I can still do a certain move. That flick, I pull my sword back to frontale, I flick down, I step in. I still have that thrust readily available. But cutting around at this range is infinitely less safe than it is cutting at long range. So what I do instead is I probe with that flick, beat Chuck's sword, and cut around to his hand. If Chuck tries to parry, I still have a dominant bind and can step in. So effectively, you're using that Mazzani cut we went over in the first sequence of this video. So the sequence for the second master is flick, deflect to hand. If it gets parried, thrust into chest. Because in Fiore, there are two options to hitting someone. You either do it from the bind, or you do it from a beat. And we'll get into beats in a second. They are a very important part of the Italian tactical wheel. All right, next up is the exchange and break of the thrust. This play starts in either two to porta de ferro, which is that sword perpendicular to the lead foot guard. You can also do it from Donna, or you can do it from Finestra or Coda Longa. So it is slightly different between high guards and low guards. If you are in a low guard and Chuck stabs in at my stomach in long point, this is bad for my health. I'm about to eat a sword to the throat. I like not dying. So what I do is I displace with my left foot and bring my point online. From here, I step in and land the counter thrust. So in a continuous manner, what it looks like is Chuck thrusts in, I displace, and see how I'm stepping left? That forces Chuck offline. If I stepped right, it would actually give Chuck the ability to overpower me and close to grapple. And then I step in to the throat. Nice and simple. From the front, it is just here, displace, step. So our next movement is the break of the thrust. This is for someone trying to rush in or someone that you need to displace a little more. So once again, Chuck and I are fencing. Chuck comes in with that thrust and continues to close. I drive his thrust down and pick up with the false edge to the noggin. So one more time, nice and slow. Chuck rides in with that thrust. I displace. I press down with that passing step. and then flick to the side of the noggin. Fairly simple. Now then, you can also do these plays from a high guard. So now I start in posta di donna. Chuck yet again thrusts in. You know that flick thrust we did a second ago? Yeah, you're just doing a flick thrust from your shoulder. If you've done KDF, it's effectively a Zornhau Ort. So I displace and stab in. One more time. Chuck comes in, I displace and thrust to the throat. I can also do it from Finestra. It's the same motion. Chuck stabs in, I displace, thrust to the throat. Nice and simple, right? You can also do the same motion from Coda Longa, but it's the exact same concept as Tutta Porta de Ferro, so we're not going to go into that. Up next is, as my first Fiore coach, Connor Kemp Cowell, dubbed it before he went to Dougherty, the traitor, the cinghiale whip. So this time you're starting with your left foot forward, you bend your legs, and you put yourself into that boar's tooth position with the sword off at a 45-degree angle. Now then, there are two uses for this guard. It is either defensive or offensive. I'm using it offensively, I'm probing with the thrust. Now then, let's say Chuck is in posta di donna or Vomtag. I now have a threat. Chuck cuts to my head. I step off line and parry with the false edge. Now then, the easiest way to hit Chuck from here is just to straighten my arms out and tap him in the head. One more time, nice and slow. Here, offline parry, bang. Now then, if Chuck is smart, he'll be able to cover that, right? So I come here, I throw the beat, I see where Chuck's arms go. The concept of eyes open fencing is very important. If you just run a program, people will be able to exploit it. Always pay attention to what your opponent's body is doing. Now then, let's say I don't think I can land this for whatever reason. Instead, I can come right, compass my back foot around, and land to the hand, which is still a fight-ending blow, and that's what you always want to consider when you are fencing. So with cinghiale from the front, the whip is very simple. You always rise up with the false edge, and you're either cutting left, or you rise up with the false edge and come straight down to the face. Nice and simple. Thanks for listening. Alrighty, our next play is if my friend here is in Vomtag, or posta di donna, and throws a cut at my head while I stand in Tutta Porta de Ferro. Ow, I have died. This is bad for my health. Please reset. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step this way and raise my sword. Go. Boom. From here, I have a couple options according to Fiore. The first is my favorite. I wrap my pommel around the wrist, grab my own blade, and smack him in the face with the sword. This is hilarious. It allows me to get some head control and land a free hit. It's probably the lowest percentage one, but it exists, so it's worth teaching. The next one is the most obvious. The cut comes, I parry, I cut the arm. Whack. Nice and simple. The follow-up for that is a little different. This time I hang, clang. Instead of cutting, I pull back. When he redirects to face his sword to me, I thrust in. You can also thrust low. If they bring their sword low, you have options. So that is the 3 ways to deal with a hanging parry and the 3 follow-ups Fiore gives us. Thank you. So our next portion is using First Master and First Scholar to close to grapple. So now we are in a bind. I come on a tough line, I flick. I get deflected. This time, instead of cutting around, I'm actually too close to get away with that. So what I do is I close to grapple, I push the elbow, and I throw the cut to the head. The motion is fairly simple. It's extend, flick, hang just like you would to cut around, pommel wraps, push the elbow, cut. You can also turn this into a disarm or an arm trap, as well as maybe a hip toss if you're better at it than I am. So once again, we come to that bind. I flick, it gets displaced. So I wrap my strong, or my grip over the strong of the sword, trap both arms, and rotate this way, stripping the sword from my opponent, at which point I pull Q over my shoulder and stab him in the throat before he inevitably gets out and puts me on my ass. This is one that you have to be quick on or get separation immediately after the disarm because otherwise you're going over. So again, we'll do it from this angle here so they can see the blades a little better. Flick, wrap, trap arms, rotate with the hips, and separate, cut. Nice and simple. From the outside, it's flick, wrap, trap, spin, pull arm. So the last part is spin and pull arm like so. So the next part of closing to grapple in Fiore is if you want to stay on the same side without hanging. So once again, we come to a bind. I close here. This time I reach under my sword, wrap the sword into my armpit, grab the cross guard, and now he's pretty stuck unless he's intelligent and lets go of the sword. So I club him in the head before he can do that. This is one of those things you have to be quick. The other simpler option is to just grab the blade with my back hand. So once again, we come to the bind, bang, grab, hit. Nice and simple, doesn't need much setup. This also works beautifully in Fiore's system against the counter thrust. So if he cuts or thrusts in at me, I can parry, and if I get that moment of staticness before he changes around, I can grab his blade, cut him in the head, stab him in the throat, or do other things. So that's the basics of grappling in Fiore. A lot of times if you're closing, you're hanging or doing something else. You can also kick the knees like Fiore says, but that's mean, so we're not going to go over it. Thank you for everything.